Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? A few things got me thinking this morning about the subject of campaign play in role-playing games and why it's a very difficult subject to have a conversation about or come to consensus about because different types of games and play styles place different limiters or expectations on what a campaign is. So, briefly, a campaign as opposed to an adventure is a series of sessions played in the same location. And over time, the string together of all these various sessions or adventures, or depending on what it is, what you call them, produces this narrative or this. You can look back and say, well, these are the things that we did here in this setting. So it's not just a episodic television type thing, although I suppose it could be that way, and things tend to string together. So there's a wider world that's interactive or not interactive. See how confusing this gets? Now, the biggest game or biggest thing that puts some conceits and limiters and expectations on what campaign play is Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons tends to stifle the conversation about RPGs quite a bit. And the reason being here, one of the things that is sort of expected or anticipated or is a part of campaign play in Dungeons and Dragons is it's not just focusing on the imagined situation, but there's an expectation and almost a requirement that the characters level up. They have to level up because very often a campaign is structured in a semi-linear or completely a linear fashion where there are big bad guys or challenges that are supposed to happen later. And in order to be able to deal with those situations and those challenges, one needs to level up and become more powerful. So over the course of the campaign, what's happening isn't just that the characters do things, but they're gaining in power. So eventually they can have this, meeting up with Vecna or whoever it happens to be, the big bad evil guy, or big good evil guy, I suppose. You know what I mean? And something like that. And so that instantly puts some rails or bumpers on what a campaign is, and it defines it very very rigidly. And so if you're thinking about campaign play in that way, it's limiting. Another way that campaign play can be limited is by a variety of other games where leveling up isn't really a thing. But if you look at some of the big campaigns put out by, say, Chaosium, or things for Call of Cthulhu or what have you, some of these things are monstrous. But sometimes the expectation is, especially in some later products, is that you're going to go from here to here to here, and certain things are going to happen. So things once again are going to progress in a somewhat linear fashion, even to the point where certain characters, maybe non-player characters, well, they can't die because they have to show up here in this next scene. So the campaign becomes this linear thing, and the expectation is we're going to go through this, campaign, this series of strung together adventures to get to this end point or to the next point. In a broader term or broader sense, a campaign occurs in a setting that's dynamic, where things are happening, where the actions of the various non-player character groups are, all in motion. And depending on what sometimes even if the GM is rolling randomly to see what happens between the two NPCs, or depending on how the player characters interact with the non-player characters and vice versa and all that kind of stuff, well, unexpected things can happen for everybody. And there's no real defined end point. I have several campaigns that I'm a player in. We have our All for One Regime Diabolique Lights and Darkness campaign, which has been a hiatus for years. It's kind of my fault. I'm supposed to run an adventure. We have the campaign that we're playing in Call of Cthulhu right now, Turn of a New Leaf, where I haven't been able to play in a while, but there's no real defined end point. There's nothing that we're supposed to find out or do. We have found out more things, but that's because we've done more things, and we've interacted with the world and seen how effective or ineffective we really are as events go on. Etc. I have several other games that I've been involved in as campaigns. The Aliens campaign or Alien campaign that we played a while back on I think mostly on Runeslinger's channel, that was a campaign where there wasn't a defined end point. We came to an end because some of the characters died, And because at this point, we kind of had gotten to a logical place where you could put it down. Realistically, we could pick that back up. Not everybody's dead, and we do have backup characters. But it's come to this point where we can put this down, and we can say that we play this. In our campaign, The Veil, we had an agreement that we were only playing 9 sessions. So we've done that. And that came to kind of a conclusion of sorts. If Cadmus died, he was going to die anyway. In our Circle of Hands game, that's kind of interesting because is it a campaign? Yeah, sort of, because the characters are experiencing things. In Circle of Hands, also different effects can happen to different characters over time. Eloy's supposed to run our 9th venture and hasn't done that yet for some years now. But, no pressure, Eloy. But that's a little bit different because it is set up literally to be like episodic television. The events of the past don't necessarily have to influence the events of the future. We've decided that, like, if certain non-player characters can show up later, if we choose to place them in an area, and in some cases we have, which has been kind of interesting, but that's not a requirement. It's just this group of Circle Knights and going into different locations. It's kind of a little bit like the original series of Star Trek or Kung Fu or something like that, where we show up someplace and decide what we're going to do about a thing, and then we bring it to an end. It's a different sort of campaign, so it's a little less, there's less things in motion. And the outside world, I don't want to say it's static, but we're not supposed to be. It's very defined. We're not supposed to be concerned about all those things. So it's kind of interesting. Various different approaches to a campaign. But just, when we're talking about this, it pays to remember that there are various different beliefs or limitations that we place on the idea of what a campaign can be. We got the dogs there now. And that can, if we're not careful, if we don't acknowledge those preconceived notions or those blinders or limiters when we're talking to each other, we can have very different ideas of what we're talking about. You know what I mean? So what's your experience with that? I'd love to hear your experience with campaigns. Has playing different styles of games or different games influenced the way you think about them? Have you ever thought about this at all? Is this all brand new to you in terms of, oh yeah, I guess not every game's like that? I'd love to hear your feedback on this. And maybe watch these videos, whatever the heck I decide to put up there. Take it easy, kids.